So what I'd like to do this morning is take the name of God, I am, and look at 4 implications of that name. God names himself for a reason. Why? Well, because he wants to reveal something about himself. And there are 4 things that we can learn about God from that name. Number 1, God is there. If God says, I am, that means that God exists. Right? But you say, Brian, that is so obvious. Why do you even mention it? Of course God is there. Well, the reason I mention it is because so many people live as though God doesn't exist. Now, they may profess to believe in God. If you go out in the streets and you ask people one by one, do you believe there's a God? Most people will say yes. Only about maybe 3% of the population would say, no, I don't believe there is a God. 97% believe in some form or fashion of God. But most of those people that you would ask that question, they would live as though God doesn't exist. They would live like an atheist. And so it's an important question for us to ask. Let's say that you're visiting a foreign country, and the king of that country discovers that you're in his realm, and so he invites you to a very special banquet, you and your whole family. And so you show up at the banquet, but you don't look at the king, you don't shake his hand, you don't address him in any way, you don't talk to him, you head straight for the food line. And you fill your plate up, and you eat till your heart's content, and then when you're done, you leave and exit out that door without ever saying a single word to the king who invited you. That's what it's like for people to profess to believe in God, but to live for their own desires and their own pleasures, and not to consult him. Do we really consult God about everyday decisions that we make? That's living like God does exist. If he exists, then I ought to ask him about these decisions. Lord, how should I spend this money? Where should I live, Lord? What church should I go to? How should I spend my free time? That's living like God does exist. We should spend our time trying to get to know this God, talking to this God, worshiping this God, communing with this God, walking in fellowship with this God. But most people don't do that. Most people are not interested in really sincerely trying to find out God's will in doing it, because that would mean they can't do their own will. Remember what Jesus said? Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. The will of God is what's ultimately important, not your own will, your own desires. It's God's purpose, God's glory, and God's will that should be uppermost in our hearts. So let's, in our minds and imaginations, let's fast forward to Judgment Day. And you've got billions of people there. And God talks to that group of people that said that they believed in him. And he said, you said that you believed in me, right? Oh, yes, Lord, we did believe in you. And so God asks the question, well, don't you usually give more respect and esteem and admiration to that person who is most beautiful and most honorable and most glorious? Well, yes, that's true. Well, then why did I have such an insignificant place in your life? Why did my existence not really seem to make any difference in your life at all? And I think that'll be an honest question that God will ask people. It doesn't matter if you profess to believe in God. Jesus will say to a great multitude, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity. You didn't do the will of my Father. You did your own will. You pursued your own dreams, your own pleasures. I think most people who say they believe in God give TV and their cell phones 100 times more attention than they do to God. Video games, you just fill in the blank. That God is not uppermost in their affections or uppermost in their thoughts.